It started with a suitcase no one claimed and a dog that wouldn't back down. What followed was a story no one at Sierra Crust Airport could have imagined. A hidden network, a missing girl, and a K9 who saw the truth before anyone else. This isn't just about crime, it's about instinct, courage, and second chances. If stories like this matter to you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and stay with us. What you're about to see is based on real patterns, real people, and one unforgettable dog. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the wide windows of Sierra Crest International Airport's Terminal C, casting a golden haze over the polished floors and murmuring crowd. Officer Dean Halstead stood at his usual post near the baggage claim area, one hand loosely gripping the leash of Shadow, the lean, disciplined German Shepherd beside him. Dean had served 2 tours in Iraq before transferring into airport security, and though his uniform no longer bore camouflage, his instincts remained razor-sharp, something he shared with his canine partner. The duo had built a quiet reputation over the years, calm, consistent, and terrifyingly effective when something felt off. It was routine until it wasn't. JL28, a steady stream of travelers passed by with heavy eyes and stuffed backpacks, most heading toward domestic connections or immigration kiosks. Among the flow of suitcases tumbling onto Carousel 6, one hard-shell black Samsonite case thudded with a weightier echo. Shadow's ears twitched before Dean noticed anything. The dog rose a few inches, tail stiff, nose flaring. Dean followed his partner's tension with practiced clarity. "You smell something?" Dean asked under his breath, already moving toward the carousel. Shadow didn't bark. He never did without cause. But the low growl rumbling in his chest was enough. The suitcase had no visible tags, no stickers, no name. It looked ordinary. But years of experience taught Dean that trouble rarely announced itself with sirens. Shadow moved in, circling the bag like a predator, and without warning he lunged, his teeth clamping down on the scene. The rip was swift, precise, not out of rage but with a deliberate intent. "Hooah, Shadow!" Dean yanked the leash slightly, but the dog had already torn a 6-inch gash across the side of the case. Passengers around them paused, a couple gasping, one woman clutching her purse. A TSA officer jogged over, eyes wide. "Officer Halstead, everything okay?" Dean nodded, crouching. "We got a reaction, no drugs or explosives alert, but he's not letting this go." Together they opened the case. No contraband, no scent of chemicals. Just a child's pink sweatshirt, a folded Mickey Mouse backpack, and nestled on top a small plush rabbit. One of those mechanical toys that played music when you squeezed its belly. Dean lifted it carefully. He turned it over, no batteries, just a soft compartment tucked under its fabric skin. His gloved hands traced it until he found something, a tiny rectangular object. "A tracker." "Hell," Dean muttered, meeting the TSA officer's eyes. "You think this is a courier drop? Maybe. Or something worse." The tracker was deactivated immediately and bagged for evidence. The suitcase had no tag, no match in the passenger database, and its barcodes were worn, either intentionally scratched or aged. Baggage claim logs didn't show a bag with that profile offloading from JL208. It was a ghost. Dean called it in and moved to secure the surrounding area. Shadow remained fixated on the suitcase, tail stiff, body coiled, like the danger hadn't passed yet. Dean trusted that tension. He always had. A young man in a yellow vest, airport lost and found, arrived moments later, clipboard in hand. "Hey, someone radioed in about a ripped case?" he asked, glancing between Dean and the torn. His ID read, H. Danner, and he smiled too quickly, stepping forward like he had something to prove. Dean frowned. "Yeah, we're holding it for investigation. You got any record of a lost claim from JL208? Danner flipped a few pages, then shook his head. "Not yet, but sometimes they come in late. People realize hours later they forgot a bag. Check again. This bag wasn't logged as offloaded." Dean's voice held firm authority, and Danner blinked, nodding stiffly. "I'll go confirm with cargo." He walked off, but Shadow followed his path with eyes like glass. Dean noted it. The next half hour passed in slow, methodical tension. Surveillance footage was pulled. The suitcase had appeared on Carousel 6 without a clear origin. It wasn't transferred from a cart or thrown from the chute. It simply rolled out among the others, like a phantom. No airline rep remembered logging it. It was as if the suitcase had been hand-placed just seconds before the first passenger arrived. The tracker was military grade, not a common GPS chip sold in retail stores. No blinking lights, just a slow internal pulse logged into a server somewhere. Whoever planted it knew what they were doing. By the time Dean walked back to the staff corridor, the sun outside had dipped into winter orange. Shadow trotted beside him, ears still angled like he heard things humans never could. Dean paused in the hallway, staring down at the dog. "You felt it before I did, didn't you?" Shadow gave no reply. He didn't have to. His job was done. He'd smelled the fear laced into fabric, the mechanical heat in the rabbit, the residue of something not quite right, and Dean knew they hadn't found the threat. They'd only found its opening move. The next morning, the airport buzzed with its usual rhythm. Boarding calls echoing from overhead speakers, families reunited at the arrivals gate, and the faint aroma of burned espresso drifting from the terminal coffee shop. Officer Dean Halstead stood outside the unaccompanied minor processing area, reviewing footage on his department-issued tablet. The suitcase from the previous night was now in evidence lockup, and while he'd filed a full report with TSA and local PD, something still gnawed at his gut. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes following every movement in the corridor with quiet precision. Nothing about the case sat right. No owner, no record, and a military-grade tracker hidden in a child's toy. It wasn't the kind of thing you chalk up to coincidence. Dean's radio crackled, and a dispatch voice came through. "Halstead, we've got an unaccompanied minor coming through Terminal B, Flight JL-208. Looks like a late processing case." Dean's brow furrowed. "JL-208, the same flight." He keyed in his reply, "Copy that. I'm 2 minutes out." He stood, clicked Shadow's leash, and made his way across the terminal. As they entered the checkpoint area, a uniformed agent was escorting a young girl, maybe 9 or 10, toward the secure waiting area for minors. She clutched a light backpack with cartoon animals printed across the fabric. Her shoulders were tense, lips pressed tightly together, but what caught Dean's attention wasn't her silence. It was Shadow. The dog froze mid-stride, tail stiff, his body locked up with sudden intensity, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. Dean gripped the leash. "Easy," he murmured. But Shadow surged forward, barking once, sharp, instinctive, almost startled. The girl jumped, her knuckles whitening around the backpack straps. The escorting officer stepped between them. "Hey, what's your dog doing?" Dean held up his badge. "Officer Halstead, K9 unit, let me see her paperwork." The escort hesitated, then handed over a manila folder. Inside were flight documents, a temporary guardianship form, and a notarized letter listing a Clint Monroe as her legal guardian in the U.S. Dean knelt, speaking gently to the girl. "Hi there. My name's Officer Dean. This is Shadow. What's your name?" The girl looked up, eyes cautious. "Ella." Her voice was quiet but steady. Dean nodded. "Where's your family, Ella?" "I'm going to stay with my Uncle Clint." Dean offered a soft smile. "And have you met him before?" She hesitated. "Only on the phone." Dean stood, eyes narrowing. He handed the folder back. "He's coming with me. I'm not sure that—" the escort began, but Dean cut him off. "Until I verify this paperwork, she's not moving." He guided Ella toward the adjacent security office. Shadow stayed close, hyper-attentive. It wasn't just standard discomfort. The dog was tracking something invisible, something Dean had learned to trust even more than paperwork or protocol. Inside the office, Dean pulled up the National Civilian Database on his laptop. He typed in Clint Monroe and ran a background search. No hits in Colorado, no driver's license, no home address, not even a tax record. He tried California, then New York. Nothing. Whoever Clint Monroe was, he didn't exist in any legitimate system. "Ella," Dean said, keeping his voice calm, "can I see your backpack for a second?" The girl glanced at Shadow, then slowly handed it over. Dean unzipped the main compartment and sifted through clothes. A travel pillow, a passport. Everything seemed normal, until he flipped over the backpack flap and saw the inside seam. Tiny black letters, stitched into the lining. LM. He blinked. The same initials found printed faintly inside the pink sweatshirt from the ripped suitcase. He stepped out of the room, closing the door gently behind him. then leaned against the hallway wall, processing. The odds were near zero that a girl from JL 208, carrying a backpack with matching initials, just happened to arrive the morning after they found a bag stuffed with tracking tech and anonymous child items. This wasn't coincidence, it was connected. Shadow padded to the door, then sat quietly, his gaze never leaving the hallway where the escort had disappeared. Dean dialed into the Department of Homeland Security's alert database and cross-referenced recent child trafficking advisories involving international routes. A few alerts came up, one in particular caught his eye. Tokyo to Colorado Springs. Suspicious patterns over 3 months, but no arrests. 3 children listed as unaccompanied, all processed through terminal staff, just like this. He opened a chat window with internal security and flagged the Ella Monroe file for immediate review. Within minutes, the response came back. The passport was real, the visa was real, but the application had been filed using a Japanese-based intermediary firm now under investigation for identity laundering. Dean's hands curled into fists. Ella didn't know she was being trafficked, but someone had set her on that path. Shadow growled low again, pressing against Dean's leg like he was ready to bolt. Dean followed the sound of approaching footsteps. A man in civilian clothes rounded the corner. Dark coat, blue jeans, a baseball cap pulled low. He held a clipboard and flashed a laminated badge. "I'm here for Ella Monroe." Dean raised an eyebrow. "You got ID?" The man nodded, flipping open a folder with fake-looking documents. Dean didn't even glance. "She's not going anywhere with you. I was told to." "You're leaving," Dean said flatly, already alerting backup through the silent button clipped under his jacket. The man hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the crowd before backup arrived. Dean didn't chase. Not yet. His priority was the girl. He re-entered the room where Ella sat curled up in the chair, staring at the floor. Dean knelt beside her again. "Do you know that man who was supposed to pick you up?" He shook her head. "I don't think so." Dean gently took her hand. "You're safe now, okay? But we're going to need your help. There are some questions we have to figure out." Outside the window, the terminal traffic carried on. Families meeting, flights departing, everything business as usual. But inside, Officer Halstead felt something irreversible shift. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than a suitcase, bigger than one child. And if the threads he'd just started to pull were any indication, the whole system might already be compromised. Back at his small office inside Terminal C, Dean Halstead sat hunched over the terminal surveillance console, his fingers flying across the keyboard as footage from the previous 24 hours loaded on multiple screens. Ella sat safely in the holding room with a female TSA officer keeping her company, Shadow resting just outside the glass door, head on his paws, eyes always alert. Dean's mind was a whirlwind, but his training forced him to remain methodical. He knew that answers were in the tapes. Cameras never slept, never lied, and rarely missed, if you knew where to look. He queued up footage from Entry Gate 7 where JL 208 passengers had deplaned yesterday evening. Using the timestamp on Ella's immigration file, he narrowed the window to a 20-minute slot. The crowd on screen was typical. Jet-lagged travelers, families scanning the crowd for loved ones, a few impatient business types heading straight to ground transport. But Dean wasn't watching the passengers. He was watching the gaps. He fast-forwarded through routine movement until one freeze frame made him sit up. There she was. Ella, small in stature, walking slightly behind a taller woman in a gray hoodie, jeans, and a disposable medical mask. The woman's posture was too composed to be a frantic parent searching for her niece. Her grip on Ella's shoulder was. Dean tapped a key and zoomed in. Blonde hair, tight ponytail. Gloved hands, no visible ID. The timestamp showed that Ella had not gone through the standard unaccompanied minor exit, nor had she interacted with any flight crew. She'd been escorted by this unknown woman through a side corridor marked Authorized Limited Personal. Dean leaned back in his chair, heartbeat picking up pace. That side corridor required a keycard entry linked to internal airport staff. He switched to feed 14B, hallway South 3, which fed into that same service corridor. He adjusted the timestamp forward by 5 minutes. There they were again, the blonde woman tapping a keycard, guiding Ella through the door without hesitation. No guards, no alarms, just quiet, confident access. Dean rewound a few seconds and paused, zoomed in on the card swipe panel. A red flash blinked once, then turned green. Whoever she was, her card was valid. Dean swore under his breath. Someone inside had issued that card. Someone who knew how to bypass the checks. He grabbed his notepad and scribbled down the timestamp, camera number, and corridor code. Then he jumped to the next logical step. See where she exited. He loaded feed 21G, service vehicle access lot, located behind the terminal's west wing. Only ground personnel and flight logistics staff were allowed back there. The area was quiet, dimly lit, but sure enough, the woman appeared again, holding Ella's hand tightly, guiding her across. A white panel van sat idling near the hangar gate. No airline markings, no rental tags. It wasn't in the system. She opened the passenger door and helped Ella inside. Then, without any hesitation, she walked to the driver's side, stepped in, and pulled away. No hesitation, no rush. The van exited through a rolling gate that should have been monitored by security, but the camera cut just before it turned onto the outer road. Dean's jaw tightened. This wasn't an isolated failure. This was organized. Someone inside had provided a working access badge. Someone had disabled external monitoring. This woman, blonde, masked, calm, was not a last-minute actor. She had a plan, access, and a child that no one could trace. Dean typed in the van's make and model into the airport's vehicle database. Nothing came up. He searched for service logs in that area. Any maintenance requests, catering deliveries, trash pickups. Still nothing. That van shouldn't have been there. His phone buzzed. An encrypted message from Central Security. The ID number scanned from the service door panel was traced to a temporary badge issued 3 days ago to M. Carter, listed as a food service contractor with SkyMeal Logistics. Dean double-checked. SkyMeal had pulled out of Sierra Crest 3 months ago due to budget restructuring. There should have been no active employees, no badge renewals. Another dead end, or another forged path. He flagged the footage and pushed a soft alert to DHS regional contacts for further ID verification on the badge and the vehicle. Shadow let out a soft, low sound just outside the office. Dean rose, walked to the doorway, and opened it. The hallway beyond was quiet, save for distant conversations and the occasional rolling suitcase. But Shadow was tense again, standing now, nose aimed toward the far corridor. Dean crouched beside him, pressing a hand to his side. "What is it, boy?" Shadow's ears tilted as if catching some vibration Dean couldn't hear. His gaze locked on the far end of the concourse, where service elevators met restricted access doors. Dean's gut churned. Someone was still inside. Maybe watching, maybe waiting. His hand hovered over the emergency radio channel switch on his vest, but he hesitated. Not yet. If this network was as deep as it seemed, triggering a full lockdown might spook whoever was involved, and risk losing the only thread they had. He returned to the console, rewound the exterior footage one more time. The white van had passed 2 more cameras on its way out, feed 29A and 29B. He watched frame by frame. In one clip, a glint reflected from the windshield, something on the dashboard. He paused and zoomed. A small plush rabbit lay beneath the glass, the same toy found in the unclaimed suitcase. Dean stared at it, a cold clarity washing over him. The same tracker-embedded toy. Whoever planted that suitcase had direct connection to Ella, and whoever the blonde woman was, she had gone to great lengths to make it look like Ella arrived unaccompanied, when in reality she'd been delivered. The footage ended, the screen returning to a static view of the terminal corridor. Dean sat still for a moment, fingers clasped tightly together, Shadow pacing slowly beside him. All the evidence pointed to something layered, calculated, not a random abduction. It was trafficking, or worse, and now, with the airport awake again and morning flights loading up, the window to act was shrinking. Dean barely had time to process the last frame, the rabbit on the van's dashboard, when his office door creaked open without a knock. He turned sharply, fingers twitching near his badge clip, but relaxed only slightly when he saw who stepped in. Logan Price. The name hit Dean like a surprise chord in a familiar song. Unexpected, not necessarily unpleasant, but full of history. Logan stood just inside the threshold. The same lean frame and slightly crooked grin he always wore, though his uniform now carried a different patch. "Still tense before lunch, huh?" Logan joked, hands raised in mock surrender. Dean didn't smile. What are you doing here? Logan shrugged, stepping in casually. He heard you were up to something unusual. A missing kid, right? One from the JL 208 mess? Dean crossed his arms. Ella Monroe, she's not exactly missing anymore. She's here, under protection. Logan nodded, pacing a bit as if the room were his. Well, that's why I'm here. I'm back on temp duty with transit response. Got a call from Central Dispatch. They want her moved to Safehold, a juvenile intake center in Aroa. Standard handoff for undocumented minors or kids with invalid guardianship. Dean's eyes narrowed. Central Dispatch called you? Logan tapped his phone. Came in 40 minutes ago. I've got a transport van in Bay G6 waiting to take her. Shouldn't we clear the area too? This kind of case could spiral if it leaks. Dean stayed silent for a beat. There was something about the timing, something too clean. He walked to his desk, pulled up the internal command log. No entry matched Logan's claim. He checked again, cross-referencing dispatch notes. Nothing listed under juvenile transfer in the past 2 hours. When he looked up, Logan was watching him, his smile thinner now. You don't trust me, Logan said. Not as a question. Dean tilted his head. I trust process. Logan shrugged again. Come on, man. This isn't Iraq. It's a kid in a dangerous spot. You want her safe, I get her out. That's simple. Dean said nothing but walked past him and opened the door to the holding room. Ella was still seated quietly, backpack on her lap. Shadow immediately stood, tail stiff, body positioned between her and the door. Dean motioned for her to stay seated. Ella, this is Logan. He says he's going to help get you somewhere safe. Ella looked unsure, glancing at Dean, then at Logan, who smiled and bent down to eye level. Hey there, kiddo, you like vans? Ours has snacks, and a better seat than this place. Shadow growled, deep and guttural. His entire posture changed the moment Logan placed his hand on Ella's backpack strap. The growl wasn't aggressive, it was protective, instinctive. Dean's eyes snapped to the dog. Shadow, he warned. But Shadow didn't stop. His muscles tensed, his ears folded back, eyes locked on Logan's hand like it was a loaded weapon. Who? Logan said, pulling back, palms up. What's his deal? Dean moved forward. He doesn't like something. Logan laughed nervously. Dogs can sense fear, right? I had bacon earlier, maybe that's it? Dean didn't answer. He motioned for Shadow to stand down, but the dog didn't relax. Instead, he stepped between Logan and Ella entirely, nudging the girl subtly behind his flank. Ella, Dean said slowly, do you remember Logan? Has he talked to you before today? She shook her head. No. Dean turned back. Let me see the order again. Logan hesitated for just a second too long before handing over his phone. Dean scanned the screen. The text looked legitimate. A central command string with a request code and a Safehold intake ID. But the formatting was off. The timestamp had been generated exactly 3 minutes after Dean filed the internal alert on Ella's case. Coincidence? Maybe. But it stank of manipulation. He handed the phone back. Wait outside while I verify this. Logan's jaw flexed, but he nodded and stepped out. As soon as the door clicked shut, Dean turned to Shadow. You felt it, didn't you? The dog whined softly, eyes fixed on the door. Dean looked down at Ella. Did Logan say anything else to you? She shrugged. Just that we're leaving now, that you said it was okay. Dean clenched his jaw. He had never said that. He opened the office intercom. Dispatch, this is Officer Halstead. Cross-check any active juvenile transfers from Terminal C to Safehold. Confirm with Central immediately. A pause. Then static. Then, negative, no transfer request issued in past 3 hours. Central shows no records under your ID. Dean felt his stomach drop. Logan had fabricated the order, or someone had sent it to him as a plant. Either way, it meant they weren't dealing with a lone player. The rabbit, the van, the blonde woman, and now Logan. This was a network, and it had tentacles inside the apport. Shadow scratched once at the floor, a silent cue he'd picked up during their military tours. It meant something was wrong now. Dean opened the door again. Logan was still in the hallway scrolling his phone, but when he looked up, his face stiffened. He knew. Dean didn't accuse him, not yet. Hang tight, he said flatly. We'll be a few more minutes. Logan nodded again, but his eyes no longer slept. Dean shut the door and leaned back against it. breathing in the sterile air of processed ventilation and recycled tension. He needed to act quickly, but without tipping the wrong hand. Whoever was watching this unfold would move fast, and they wouldn't wait for paper. Dean Halstead sat in his office with his left hand gripping a paper coffee cup and his right hovering over the screen of his department-issued cell phone, the cursor blinking next to Logan Price's name. 2 hours had passed since Logan had left Terminal C with Ella. After some tense back and forth between Dean and Central Dispatch, an emergency verification team had reluctantly approved the transfer, fighting pressure from the higher-ups to move children quickly from active zones to government-sanctioned shelters. Dean hadn't wanted to let her go, not without full confirmation, but procedural override was out of his hands. Still, something about the exit felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into place. Now, with the clock ticking into early afternoon and the air inside the office stale from lack of circulation, Dean tapped the call icon and lifted the phone to his ear. 1 ring, 2, 3. Then the robotic voice. "The number you have dialed is unavailable. Please try again later." Dean pulled the phone back, stared at the screen, and hit redial. Same result. He tried Logan's backup number, the one from their academy days, and got nothing. No signal, no voicemail. Just dead air. He swore under his breath and stood, pacing past the wall-mounted monitors where the security feeds rolled silently. Ella should have arrived at Safehold nearly an hour ago. He opened the interagency portal and logged into the juvenile intake system. No sign-in records matched her name or Logan's access ID. He ran the names under aliases, alternate spellings, even known variants from the child trafficking database. Nothing. She hadn't been processed. Logan hadn't dropped her off. Ella Monroe was off the grid. Dean returned to the main console and switched over to vehicle tracking. All transportation units that passed through Terminal C's security gate were required to ping internal systems every 5 minutes, giving dispatch a real-time location log. He input Logan's van ID manually. The system located the plate, Unit 1149X. The last recorded ping was 7 minutes after departure. It showed the van leaving the main road outside Sierra Crest, then turning abruptly off Interstate 6 onto a secondary route. State Utility Road 19A, a dirt path mostly used by service vehicles and off-limits to passenger transport. Dean's eyes narrowed. That road hadn't been in use since the airport's expansion project shut it down for safety. No cameras, no civilian traffic, just fencing and rusted signage. It ran parallel to a decommissioned access tunnel that used to connect to an old radar station. The van's signal ended abruptly 2 minutes after that turn. No GPS lock, no update, just gone. He leaned in, checking the system's satellite overlay. Weather had been clear, no topographical interference. The disappearance wasn't natural, it was intentional. Shadow let out a low sound behind him, as if reacting to the sudden shift in Dean's posture. Dean looked over his shoulder at the dog, who now stood, tail rigid, gaze fixed on the hallway. The air felt thicker. Something was unraveling. Dean picked up the phone and dialed Central Security directly. "I need eyes on Utility 19A. We've got a van that went dark near there." The response came slow, laced with hesitation. "The route's offline, decommissioned last year. We don't monitor it anymore." Dean's voice tightened. "Then I need a team now." He didn't wait for confirmation. He clipped his badge, grabbed Shadow's leash, and started down the hallway with a controlled urgency. Passengers moved past him in clusters, oblivious to the clockwork of failure ticking beneath their feet. At the dispatch dock, he rerouted the nearest unit to meet him at the outer gate. Before stepping outside, Dean stopped at the backup console and downloaded the last GPS burst from the van's system. A single frame of data. Latitude, longitude. Speed 22F, then dead. He pulled up an archived map of the old radar site. There was a warehouse near the coordinates, abandoned since 2014. It had been slated for demolition but left untouched due to zoning dispute, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear without leaving the city. He checked his phone again. Still no response from Logan. Still no log of Ella's intake. He punched in one last contact, Jason Mulrooney, an analyst at DHS he'd worked with during a joint op 2 years ago. "Jason," he said when the line picked up, "I've got a missing kid and a transport vehicle that went dark off grid. I need satellite sweep of Utility 19A and surrounding 5-mile radius. Something's not right. Jason didn't ask questions. Send me the GPS data, give me 10. Dean turned to Shadow, whose energy had shifted entirely. Shoulders tight, breath sharp like he was already preparing for terrain. The dog remembered the feel of bad ground. They both did. As they moved toward the patrol vehicle, the sky outside had begun to dim with thickening clouds. Though no rain was in the forecast, Dean felt the shift in atmosphere the way a hunter senses presence in the trees, an invisible press of attention coming from somewhere nearby, but not quite visible yet. He didn't speak as they rolled out through the airport's rear service road, crossing past faded barriers and unmanned checkpoint. Shadow stayed at full alert, nose pressed lightly to the air vent, tail unmoving. As they neared the turnoff to 19A, Dean's phone lit up. Jason's voice came through flat and fast. You've got an abandoned warehouse 70 meters east of your last van signal. It's not on any commercial maps, but I pulled an archived drone pass from 4 months ago. There's evidence of heat signatures. Dean didn't respond. He hung up and veered the car down the dirt road, the tires crunching over loose gravel and the scent of pine dust mixing with diesel exhaust. He glanced at Shadow, who now stood fully upright, staring through the windshield as if trying to see through time. Dean pressed his foot gently on the brake as the structure came into view, just beyond a bend in the trail. A squat gray building with metal paneling, graffiti faded by sun and wind. No lights, no movement. He cut the engine and sat in silence. Shadow didn't wait for a command. He growled low, one paw lifting, his entire body ready to leap. Dean gripped the handle of the door, eyes locked on the edges of the structure, searching for motion, waiting for, as Dean Halstead stepped out of the cruiser and approached the perimeter of the abandoned warehouse. Something cold and familiar settled deep in his chest. The wind had picked up, brushing against the steel siding of the structure like dry whispers. Shadow stood beside him, unmoving, waiting for the signal to move forward. But Dean hesitated, not because of immediate danger, but because of the flood of memory creeping in uninvited. The setting, the remote road, the silence, the gut-tightening sense that he was already one step behind, tore open a scar he thought had closed. 3 years earlier, Dean had been pulled into a joint federal investigation after 2 unaccompanied minors disappeared from the east gate of Sierra Crest, seemingly vanishing without a trace. The cases had gone cold until a transport driver was found with falsified documents and unregistered access codes. That driver was Logan Price. Dean had vouched for him, then watched as evidence mounted. Surveillance had placed Logan near the transfer zone the day both children disappeared. The link was undeniable, but when investigators pulled the hard drives from the entry logs, the data had been wiped. The logs were inconclusive, witnesses backed out, and Logan walked away without charges, protected, they said, by sufficient evidence. Dean hadn't spoken to him since. Till now, he blinked hard, forcing the past back as he moved toward the building. The front entrance was chained but not locked. A piece of rusted rebar kept it in place, easily dislodged. He looked down at Shadow. "Let's go," he whispered. The dog pushed forward, body low, silent, his training kicking in as if no time had passed since their last active operation together. Inside, the air was stale with rot and dust. Crates lined the walls, old airport equipment, scraps of broken conveyor belts. Crates stamped with export codes from nearly a decade ago. Dean moved slowly, flashlight cutting through the dim. Shadow sniffed along the floor, then suddenly stiffened near a corner stacked with tarps. Dean approached and pulled the cover back. Empty food containers, a half-finished water bottle, a child's sock. Fresh, someone had been here, very recently. Dean took a photo, then turned and noticed a dark smear along the concrete near the loading dock. He bent down. Not blood, but a transfer mark. Something heavy had been dragged. He stood and followed the trail toward a side exit leading to a small gravel lot out back. The tire impressions weren't deep, but distinct enough. Same van pattern. He keyed the coordinates into his phone and sent them to Jason at DN. Before heading back to the cruiser, he paused. His mind wouldn't let go of Logan. Something had always been off about how clean his record was after the last investigation. Dean walked back to the vehicle, pulled out his tablet, and connected to the airport's internal disciplinary archive. The system was old, slow, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic red tape, but it still stored the unofficial notes, the never forgotten. He typed, Price, Logan D, status, cleared, case H under 76-2A 3 years prior. Details, transfer breach, minor processing irregularities, insufficient evidence. He scrolled past the summary and opened the deeper incident matrix. There, among the footnotes, were cross-referenced complaints. 2 filed anonymously, 1 redacted. They all described behavior eerily similar to what Dean had seen in the past 24 hours. Unscheduled departures, gaps in camera coverage, minors rerouted through unauthorized exits. And Logan was the common thread. Dean clenched his jaw and scrolled further. A name stood out from an internal memo. Officer Rena Carver, former supervisor of Terminal C Logistics. She'd flagged Logan for unreported contact with unaccompanied minors in 3 separate incidents. Her notes mentioned a specific behavior pattern. Logan always claimed last-minute dispatch orders, but those orders were never verified in official logs. Just like today. Just like with Ella. Dean's heart pounded harder. He wasn't chasing a coincidence. He was reopening a case that should have never closed. He tapped into the K9 behavior logs. An archive automatically populated every time Shadow triggered during routine inspection. He filtered by unusual reaction with no positive scent confirmation. 4 logs appeared in the past year. 4 times Shadow had fixated on luggage without triggering on narcotics, explosives, or contraband. Each entry had been written off as non-actionable. Dean opened the details. Case 1, April 16, bag from flight AB-143, unclaimed, found with child's toy and expired snacks. No owner identified. Case 2, June 9, duffel left near Terminal B bathrooms. Clothes inside labeled M. Video record missing 8 minutes. Case 4, November 14, pink carry-on matching description of current suitcase. No processing data. Never claimed. Shadow had alerted each time. Every bag linked to a child who had arrived solo. And every child, Dean now realized, had vanished from documentation within 48 hours. He leaned back in the seat, knuckles tight against the wheel. He hadn't failed to act, he had been trained not to see the pattern. They all had. The system wasn't just compromised, it had been quietly bleeding for over a year, and no one had pulled the thread long enough to unravel the whole cloth. Dean looked at Shadow, whose ears twitched slightly, sensing the shift in energy. He scratched the dog's head once, a brief gesture of apology. "You were right," he murmured. The past wasn't just haunting them, it was repeating itself, emboldened by the silence that had protected it for too long. And Logan had never left the game, he'd just changed the rules. Dean knew now that what started with a suitcase, a stuffed rabbit, and a false pickup order was just the surface. What lay underneath was older, deeper, and far more deliberate than he'd let himself believe. The sky above Sierra Crest had dulled into a pale, overcast hue as Dean Halstead steered the cruiser off the gravel access road onto a narrow dirt path leading toward the western perimeter of the airport's unused industrial zone. The GPS signal from the rabbit toy, the tracker they'd pulled from the suitcase, had gone dark over 6 hours earlier, but not before it emitted one last burst of coordinates. Dean had plugged the numbers into his tablet, and the path had led him here. A warehouse listed on outdated schematics as Storage B-17, once used for overflow luggage and broken equipment, now long decommissioned, fenced in by rusted chain link and forgotten by every recent inspection record. Shadow stood in the back seat, nose pressed to the glass, muscles taut with readiness. Dean parked just outside the barrier, cut the engine, and stepped into the place. Radiated abandonment, but not emptiness. Tracks in the dust were too recent. Footprints, a set of smaller impressions alongside heavier boot marks, and the faint indents of tire treads cutting across the gravel into a rear bay door. Dean drew his service weapon, clipped his badge to his belt, and unlatched the rear door. "Let's move," he told Shadow, who jumped down silently, his body low and eyes locked on the structure ahead. They approached slowly, Dean sweeping his flashlight beam across the metal panels, stopping at a padlocked side door. The lock wasn't standard, it was a coded latch, newer than anything that should have been installed in a building like this. Dean crouched, inspected the casing, and noticed faint scratches near the edge, like it had been pried open and resecured multiple times. Someone had been using this place regularly. He pulled out his multi-tool, wedged it into the seam, and within seconds, the lock gave way with a dull metallic snap. The door creaked open, releasing a wave of stale air tinged with something acrid, chemical, faintly medicinal. Shadow didn't wait. He pushed forward, nose twitching, ears angled like radar dishes. His entire frame radiated. The interior was cavernous. Rows of old shelving units pushed against the walls. Crates stacked carelessly near the center. But what made Dean's breath catch was the makeshift structure erected in the far left quadrant. Blue canvas dividers hung from portable rods, forming a curtain around a small square area. Movement flickered behind it. Dean moved fast but silent. Shadow already ahead, a growl rising low in his throat. Dean gripped the curtain's edge and pulled it back in one swift motion. 3 children. Ella sat slumped against the wall, her eyes half-lidded, lips dry, head nodding slightly as if fighting sleep. Beside her were 2 other kids, younger, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 or 8, similarly dazed. Ivy lines ran into their arms, taped down with medical precision. Dean dropped to his knees, holstered his weapon, and reached for Ella's wrist. Pulse? Her eyes fluttered open. Recognition flickered, then confusion. "Dean?" she murmured. It's okay. You're safe now," he said, even though every cell in his body screamed otherwise. Shadow positioned himself near the tent opening, body tight, growl deepening. Dean scanned the floor, noting the cooler nearby, half-filled syringes, labels in a foreign language, medical-grade tranquilizers. None of this was amateur work. He pulled out his phone to call for backup, but paused when his light caught something else. A folder tucked beneath a nearby tarp. He opened it. Inside were laminated IDs, forged flight credentials, and 3 uniforms. One bearing the insignia of a regional airline, the others marked with generic pilot patches. Passports lay beneath them, all American, all for minors, all stamped with arrival dates from the past 6 months. Then he saw the list. Typed, stapled, sorted by state: Colorado, Utah, Nebraska. Names, dates of birth, flight numbers, status. Ella Monroe was on page 3. Her name had been crossed out in red ink. Dean's throat went dry. This wasn't just trafficking, it was logistical. Organized, someone had mapped the system, found holes in every level of transit protection and filled them with silence and forged paperwork. He snapped photos of every page, careful not to disturb the evidence. Shadow growled again, this time louder, body shifting toward the opposite side of the warehouse. Dean stood quickly, grabbed the folder, and moved toward the children. "Stay with them," he ordered Shadow, then sprinted to the corner. Footsteps, fast, 2 sets. Dean pressed against a crate, weapon drawn, just as 2 men turned the corner, both in maintenance uniforms, both carrying duffel bags. One froze when he saw Dean, the other reached for something inside his coat. "Freeze!" Dean shouted. "Put it down!" The one with the coat bolted, disappearing behind stacked crates, while the other dropped his bag and raised his hands. "I'm just a cleaner, man. I was told this was empty." Dean cuffed him swiftly, then turned toward the dark space where the other had vanished. Shadow let out a sharp bark, an alert. Dean returned to the kids. One of the boys had begun to cry softly. Dean knelt, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "You're okay," he said again, trying to believe it himself. He tapped his radio. "Officer Halstead. Immediate backup to warehouse B-17. I've got 3 children, possible sedation. 2 suspects on scene, 1 fleeing, 1 detained. This is not an abandoned property, this is—" He looked at Ella again. Her fingers twitched. She was trying to speak. Dean leaned in. "Logan," she whispered. Was he detained by the man he was transiting into?" Logan's pulse surged. He stared at her, then turned toward the far corner of the warehouse, jaw clenched. There was no doubt anymore. Dean Halstead crouched beside Ella, gently brushing her hair away from her clammy forehead as the call to local PD connected. "This is Officer Dean Halstead, badge number 72804, requesting immediate medical and tactical response to warehouse B-17 on West Sierra property. 3 child victims on site, 1 suspect detained, 1 at large, possible armed." Dean stood, eyes scanning the darkened warehouse corners, ears tuned to Shadow's every breath. The dog remained coiled near the makeshift tent, gaze fixed outward. The children were stable for now, but this wasn't over. Dean could feel the air shift. The silence wasn't right, not empty but pregnant with something withheld. Then a sound, a faint scrape of metal against metal. Dean turned. The rear utility door creaked open, just enough for a figure to slip through. Logan Price stepped into the low light, his face paler than Dean remembered, the edges of his eyes strained with panic and exhaustion. He held something in his right hand, a taser, high-voltage civilian-grade but illegal in this context. His left hand trembled by his side. Dean raised his weapon. "Don't take another step, Logan." Logan froze, breathing hard, but kept the taser angled slightly downward. "You don't understand, Dean. I didn't hurt anyone. I never laid a finger on those kids." Dean didn't lower his weapon. "That's enough." Logan's voice cracked. "They told me it was just transport, that they'd be taken to better homes, safer places. I owed money. 120 grand. Vegas. I was drowning. I thought I could handle one drop. Just one." Dean stepped forward, keeping his stance controlled. "So you've been driving children out of the airport in vans, in secret, with falsified orders, and you thought what, that this was just a rideshare service?" Logan flinched. "I didn't know how deep it was. Not at first. They knew everything about me. They had my mom's address, my bank info. They said if I didn't help, they'd make me disappear." Dean's voice darkened. "You made them disappear instead." Logan's grip on the taser tightened, then dropped slightly. "I swear to God, Dean, I was gonna stop. After this one." Dean kept his weapon steady. "There's no after anymore." Behind him, Shadow growled low again, his nose pointed toward the heating duct system along the warehouse's ceiling. Dean glanced up. The vents had no condensation, no humming fan vibration, no airflow, nothing. He stepped sideways, then slowly holstered his weapon, keeping his eyes on Logan. "You ever wonder why nobody found this place sooner?" Logan looked confused. "What?" Dean gestured around. 3 kids. Heavy sedation. Generators. Electric coolers. Surveillance masks. And no one ever noticed the energy signature? This whole place should have lit up every heat map in the county. Logan didn't reply. Dean continued. "I ran a diagnostic. The thermal sensors covering this grid were disabled last week. Not broken, overridden. By someone with admin clearance." Logan blinked, mouth opening slightly, panic flaring again. "That wasn't me. I don't even know how to access that system." Dean took one more step. "Exactly. Only someone in Airport Central Security Command can bypass the thermal net remotely. Which means whoever's running this isn't just watching the airport from the outside. They're embedded inside." The words hung in the air like static. Logan looked down at the taser in his hand, suddenly realizing how small and ridiculous it seemed in the middle of something so much larger. "You're saying there's someone above all this? Someone at the top?" Dean didn't answer. He didn't need to. He already knew. The name had been circling in his mind since the data wipe from 3 years ago, since the surveillance blind spots and badge cloning. Logan's role was significant, but not central. He was a pawn with guilt in his eyes and too much to lose. Dean reached out slowly, extending his hand. "Give me the taser. This ends now." Logan hesitated, then placed the device into Dean's palm, his shoulders collapsing as if years of weight had finally given out. Dean nodded once, clipped the taser to his belt, then stepped back toward the children. He activated his body cam and walked to the back wall, where a service panel had been torn open. Wires had been stripped, rerouted, and plugged into a wireless switch module, military grade, not available on the commercial market. He snapped photos, then scanned the access code imprinted on the motherboard. It returned a match. The unit had been assigned 6 months ago to a secure locker inside the central security vault at Sierra Crest. The name attached, Director Evan Darnell. Dean's throat tightened. Darnell had been with airport security for almost 15 years, a public-facing figure who ran orientation workshops and appeared in public safety campaigns. But beneath the smile, Dean had always sensed something off, a tendency to redirect blame, a resistance to audits, and a habit of keeping everything just clean enough to look untouchable. He stood frozen, the name echoing in his head, as outsider sirens finally cut through the silence. The screech of sirens drew closer as red and blue lights cut through the dusty haze outside the warehouse, bouncing off rusted siding like an urgent call to conscience. Dean Halstead stood still, shadow at his side, watching as paramedics moved in to stabilize the 3 sedated children, while uniformed officers swept through the structure with weapons drawn. Logan had been taken into custody without resistance, now seated on the back bumper of an unmarked SUV, head down, wrists zip-tied, a blanket draped over his shoulders, though he hadn't asked for it. Dean handed over the evidence folder, the forged uniforms, and the list of children to the first arriving investigator, then moved to the command tent hastily erected just off the access road. Inside, Agent Lena Brooks from DHS was already flipping through the documentation, her brows furrowed in disbelief as she absorbed the scope of what they'd uncovered. Dean leaned in over the table. "Check the thermal override logs. The module came from Security Vault 7, assigned to Evan Darnell." Lena shook her head. "I checked. Darnell's badge was flagged for unusual access, yes, but he didn't activate the override himself." Dean frowned. "Then who did?" Lena tapped her screen, enlarging a name that flashed at the top of the internal audit trail. "Patrick Harlan, Deputy Director of Airport Security, retired 4 months ago." Dean's blood chilled at the name. Harlan had been a fixture at Sierra Crest for nearly 2 decades, a career bureaucrat with a military background, always praised for his sterile precision and operational efficiency. He'd trained half the officers in Terminal C, including Dean. 4 months ago, he'd announced a sudden retirement for health reasons, followed by a going-away ceremony and a short local news feature. Dean remembered shaking the man's hand, offering the obligatory words of respect while something unspoken hovered beneath the surface. Now, his name was tied to a trafficking ring. Lena continued, "I just received a ping from satellite tracking. Harlan's satellite phone went active last night for less than 90 seconds. Location, a cabin compound near the Colorado-Wyoming border. Coordinates just 15 miles south of Laramie." Dean's jaw tightened. That region had long been a blind spot for law enforcement, rural, underpatrolled, and riddled with decommissioned ranger stations from the Cold War era. 4 years ago, one of those stations had been the site of a failed raid involving child smuggling through private airstrips. The suspects had vanished, evidence had gone missing, and Patrick Harlan had been on site then too, supposedly supporting the cleanup operation. Dean's mind reeled, threads connecting across years, jurisdictions, and buried case files. Lena pulled up Harlan's access log. "Here's the thing," she said, pointing to a line of code. "His badge was deactivated, but his security clearance was never manually revoked, which means he still had access to all encrypted systems, including logistics manifests and perimeter surveillance." Dean stepped back, processing. "He's been watching us," Lena nodded grimly. "Worse, he may have been orchestrating it." Dean paced the dirt floor of the command tent, every thought anchored to the name that now poisoned every step he'd taken inside the airport walls. "We trusted him, we let him design the systems. He knew the routes. He knew how to make it all invisible." Lena swiped to a screen displaying a cluster of recent missing child reports from the tri-state region. 6 of these kids passed through Sierra Crest in the past year. 3 were marked as runaways, 2 custodial disputes, 1 undetermined. But they all followed the same pattern. Arrived alone, processed without guardian contact, exited via personnel gates. Dean exhaled slowly. "He built a pipeline," Lena added, "and he covered it with Paws." Outside, the radio squawked. "Command, this is Unit 12. We've secured the storage lockers at Terminal C. Found badge duplicators, printed flight orders, and spare access credentials, all tagged with Harlan's old office ID." Dean moved toward the exit, adrenaline pulsing again. "Is there any way he knows we're onto him?" Lena hesitated. "He does now. That satellite phone, its signal was spoofed. My analyst says the burst." Dean muttered under his breath. "He's pulling us north." Lena looked at him. "You think it's a trap?" Dean shook his head slowly. "No. I think it's worse. I think it's his next hub." A shadow barked once outside, alert but not alarmed, his signal that something was shifting in their proximity. A new element entering the field. Dean stepped out into the cooling afternoon light, looking across the ridge beyond the dirt road. The horizon looked deceptively peaceful, a stretch of trees hiding a system of tunnels, warehouses, and unmarked properties that law enforcement had failed to map entirely. He pulled out his phone and dialed Jason Mulrooney. "Jason, I need aerials of the Laramie perimeter. Look for compound layouts, small airstrips, anything buried under forest cover, and cross-check against any shipments processed under Harlan's watch in his last 6 months." Jason responded immediately. "Copy that. Also, you're gonna want to see this. Someone just filed an international flight manifest 3 hours ago using Sierra Crest's old medical transport channel. Destination, private strip in Wyoming. Cargo listed as specialized humanitarian transfer. Number of passengers, 3 minors." Dean's blood ran cold. Ella hadn't been the last. She was part of a shipment, and there were more coming. Or already gone. Dean Halstead stood on the edge of the runway outside the Northern Federal Airfield, 9 days after the warehouse raid, watching the early morning fog lift from the tarmac as a black SUV rolled in under escort. The man stepping out wore civilian clothes, but the bulletproof vest beneath his jacket was visible to anyone looking for it. His hair had thinned, and the once proud posture now hunched under the weight of exposure, but there was no mistaking the identity of Patrick Harlan. The former deputy director of security at Sierra Crest had finally been brought into custody after nearly a week on the run, captured in a barn near the Laramie foothills, trying to disguise himself as a ranger volunteer. The arrest was quiet, but the indictment that followed was anything but. Dean had hand-delivered the evidence packet to the Department of Homeland Security. Every image, manifest, intercepted radio message, and forged document compiled into a digital brief so airtight that even the most conservative voices at the Bureau couldn't dismiss it. The trigger had been the flight manifest uncovered by Jason, the one listing 3 minors under the humanitarian exemption code Harlan himself had created years ago. That, plus the warehouse logs, plus Logan's reluctant but complete confession, painted a picture of methodical exploitation carried out under the nose of a system meant to protect. Dean hadn't done it alone. He'd called in a favor from a man named Cole Navarro, a former Marine turned DHS liaison, who owed him from an op in Mosul in 2013. Cole made sure the file landed on the right desk at the right time with no bureaucratic detour. Once that happened, it was over. Harlan's name became radioactive. His assets were frozen. His known associates flipped, and the task force swelled from 3 analysts to a multi-state operation now nicknamed Echo Root. Dean hadn't slept much. The adrenaline wore off slowly, replaced by the deep ache of what had been missed over the years. The cases dismissed, the children lost, the systems compromised not by violence, but by silence. But something about standing there on the tarmac, watching a man who once taught him airport protocol be led away in handcuffs, brought a sense of balance, if not peace. Later that week, Dean sat in a clean suit inside a federal auditorium in D.C., one hand resting on the sleek black harness of Shadow, who sat obediently beside his chair, chest high, eyes scanning the crowd even in a room full of applause. The event had been arranged hastily but carried the weight of national attention. Shadow was being formally recognized for his role in uncovering what officials were now calling one of the most organized trafficking networks in recent U.S. airport history. A crystal plaque was placed in Dean's hand, but it was the one placed around Shadow's neck, a thick medallion with a K9 emblem and the words Federal Service Valor, that made his throat tighten. The applause quieted slightly as the MC introduced a surprised guest to speak. A girl with dark hair standing small against the podium, her voice steady despite the lights. "Hi, I'm Ella Monroe," she said. "A few weeks ago I was really scared. I didn't know where I was going or who I could trust. But someone saw me. Someone didn't ignore it. That someone was a dog named Shadow." She paused, glancing down at the German shepherd who now perked his ears at her voice. He didn't talk. He didn't need to. He just knew something was wrong. Because of him and Officer Dean, I'm here today. I'm going home. The room stayed quiet, the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from collective reverence. Then Ella looked straight at Dean and smiled, that rare kind of smile that only comes when safety has been hard-earned. "When I grow up," she said clearly, "I want to adopt a dog just like Shadow, because I want to help protect kids like me." Dean felt something crack inside his chest, pride maybe, or sorrow laced with hope. He reached down, scratched Shadow behind the ears, and whispered, "You did good, partner. Outside, reporters would later ask about the case, about the failures, about how many names were still unaccounted for. But in that moment, inside the quiet celebration of courage and correction, Dean let himself feel something else entirely: resolve. There would be more days like this, more trails to track, more names to uncover. But there would also be people like Ella, who survived, who remembered, and who carried forward the instinct to protect. As the ceremony ended and the room rose in standing ovation, Shadow gave one low bark, not urgent, not alarmed, just a single sound in a sea of clapping hands, as if to say, "We're not done, but we're doing it right." Dean smiled and stood tall, one hand on Shadow's collar, the other ready to reach for whatever came next. Thanks for staying with us through Shadow and Dean's journey. If stories like this move you, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next case. We'd love to hear what you think. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Were you surprised by who turned out to be behind it all? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We read everyone.